Now we're moving on to the next section, which is the 5 fundamental questions. These are just 5 questions that every economic system must answer. So we're going to look at each one of these on the next few slides, and we're going to see how they're answered in the market system. Now, keep in mind here, these are the questions. If we were in the command system, the central planning board would be answering these questions. So this is kind of what the central planning board does as well. But we will only be talking about here how the market system works. The first question is, what goods and services will be produced? In the market system, the goods and services that are produced are those that will create a profit. So you may think at first that the businesses decide what's going to be produced. But if a business decides to produce a good and sell that good, but no one buys that good, they're either going to go out of business or make another product that people do want to purchase. So in reality, what's being produced depends on what consumers purchase. This is actually the definition of consumer sovereignty. It means that consumers determine what goods and services are produced, and they do that by using their dollar votes. So dollar votes just mean that we vote for goods by choosing what we spend our money on. So if we buy that good, then we're voting for that good to continue to be produced. If we walk past the good and we don't buy it, then we are voting against that good. This way, businesses keep producing what we purchase. The second question is, how will the goods and services be produced? And the answer is, in the most efficient way possible, which is the least cost production technique. This is going to be dependent upon the available technology as well as the prices of the resources that we're going to use. This is where we're going to get into the only math in this chapter. So we're going to be solving for the least cost production technique. And that is the formula I gave you here of total. You will be looking at 3 or 4 different production methods, and you will solve for the cost of using each of those methods or techniques. And then the business will choose the one that is the lowest cost. So for each of them, you're going to take the prices of the resources, multiply by how many units of the resources that they're using, and then you add them all up. So in general, you're using more than one resource. So you're going to be using some labor, some land, some capital, and the entrepreneur as well. Along with finding the least cost production technique, we're also going to be solving for the total revenue that the company is earning. And the total revenue, remember, revenue is the amount of money that they bring in from selling their product. So you're going to take the amount of the product that they sold, that's the quantity of the product, and multiply by the price of the product. So how many they sold times the amount that they sold each one for will give you the revenue. The last thing that we're going to do is to solve for profit, or if we get a negative, then we call it a loss. And profit is the amount of money that they have left over after they've already paid all their costs. So you take the total revenue that they brought in, subtract the cost to make those products, and you get the profit. I'm going to show you an example, and then you'll have one to try on your own. You will be given normally it's three different methods of production or techniques that the business can use. And then they're going to choose to use either first, the second, or the third, depending on whichever one is the least costly. In each technique, they'll tell you how many units of resources that you'll be using. So 4 units of labor, 1 land, 1 capital, 1 entrepreneur. Notice the second technique is a little bit different. So this one uses more land and less labor. And the third technique uses even more land and a little bit more capital as well. You will also be giving the price of each of the resources. So for each labor that's hired, it will cost the business $2. For every land used, it will cost them $1, and etc. This part right here, the cost, this is what you'll be solving for. So you're not given the cost here. You'll first look for how much it costs for each of the resources that they use, and then you add them all together. So for technique 1, they're hiring 4 units of labor at $2 a piece. That means they're spending $8 on labor. For land, they're using 1 land at $1 a piece. So $1 on land. For capital, 1 capital at $3. So $3 on capital, and 1 entrepreneur at $3. Then you take the costs of each of the resources and you add them together, and that will give you the total cost for using technique 1. Follow the same process for solving for total cost for technique 2 and total cost for technique 3. Then you're going to choose which of the 3 they will use. So compare the total cost, choose the one that is the least. So this firm is going to produce using technique 2 because it's the least cost method. And they will always, if they're being rational, they'll choose the least costly method because it's the method that's going to lead to the greatest profit. The next thing we'll be doing here is solving for revenue. So revenue is equal to the price times the quantity. And this is the price and quantity of the good that's being produced. This is not in the chart. It will be given to you separately, which it says up here at the top. So there's 3 different techniques for producing 5 bars of soap, and the price of soap is $3. So if the firm sells each of the 5 bars for $3 a piece, they will be gaining revenue of $15. Our next step is to calculate the firm's profit. So profit will be the total revenue minus the total cost. In this case, we just solved for total revenue, which was $15. The total cost is coming from the chart. That's what we solved for here. You just have to remember that you chose the least cost method, which means the total cost will be $13. So in this case, the profit will be $2. The last determination to make is, will this business stay in business or will they shut down? As long as the profit is positive, so the profit here is $2, then the business will stay in business. They will continue to produce. Even if this number is 0, they will continue to produce. Now, if you have any type of business background, this may not make sense because the profit number is so low, or if profit is 0, but keep in mind that when we calculate cost in economics, we also take into consideration the opportunity cost. So they're being paid equivalent to what their next best opportunity was. And you can even see that in the chart. Notice we have our entrepreneur, that's our business owner here, is getting paid $3. Every time this business makes 5 bars of soap, the entrepreneur gets $3. So they are getting a good steady income. And when the profit is higher than 0, they're getting even more income than they anticipated. So what you want to keep in mind here is that when profit is positive, like it is here, there's extra profit to be made, so more firms will enter the market. This industry is going to expand. There will be new businesses in this industry, and there will be more resources used, in this case, to make soap. If you get a 0 for profit, then that means the industry is going to stay exactly the same size. So this business would stay in business, continue to produce soap, but there is not going to be any more firms joining the market. And if you get a negative here, a negative means there is an economic loss. If there's an economic loss, this business will close down and the industry will contract or get smaller. Here's one for you to try. What I've done is I've changed the prices of the resources, but you'll use the same method. So choose which technique they're going to use, solve for revenue, cost, profit, and then decide if the industry will expand, contract, or not change. Pause the video here and hit play when you're ready to compare your answers with mine. I filled in the cost table for you so you can compare your work to mine, and I'll just go over one of these. So let's do technique 3 together. So with technique 3, we are going to multiply the units times the price of that resource. So the company is using 1 worker at $1, so they're only spending $1 on workers. They're using 4 pieces of land at $2 per unit, so $8 on land. They're using 2 capital at $4 a piece, so that's $8 on capital. And then 1 entrepreneur at $3 is $3. And then you add all of these up, and you would get $20. And you're going to do that with each of the techniques. So you should have gotten 13, 15, and then 20. Once you have your table completed, then you can answer question number 1, which is, which technique will be used to produce soap? And the answer is the least costly one. So we're looking for the lowest cost. That would be this one here, which means they will be using technique 1 to produce soap. Question number 2, what's the total revenue? Remember, revenue is price times quantity. And we're looking for the price and quantity of the product that they're making. Remember, we can't find this in the table. It will be info given to you separately. So we're going to use these 2 sentences down here. The table shows 3 techniques for producing 4 bars of soap, and each bar of soap sells for $4. So the price of soap is $4 times the quantity of soap that they're producing and then selling, so 4 bars, will be total revenue of $16. Question 3, what's the total cost? This you have already solved for in the table. You have to just decide which of the total cost you're using. Since we're using technique 1, then the total cost is $13. Now to solve for profit. Profit is the total revenue minus the total cost. So total revenue is $16 minus total cost is $13. That means that the firm is making a profit of $3 for every 4 bars of soap that they produce. Since this business is making a positive profit, that means they will continue to produce soap and the industry will expand. So more firms will start making soap, and we will also be using more resources. As a whole economy, more of our resources will go towards making soap. Now we're moving on to the third of our 5 questions, which is who will get the output? Once we've made all of these goods and services, the buyers that have the ability and willingness to pay will get the product. And recognize that this ability depends on the income that the consumers receive, and that's going to be dependent upon what resources that they own. So you own your resource of labor, and you are currently going to college, and so you're trying to increase the value of your labor resource. And that will increase your income and increase the amount of products you're able to produce. The 4th question is, how will the system change? The short answer is quickly. So the market system is very dynamic. It's always adjusting, and it's going to be adjusting to things like consumer taste. So if all of a sudden a good becomes very popular, a lot of business are going to start producing it. The next one is changes in technology. If there's a new method of production, then the businesses are going to look, is this technique better than the other techniques that I was using? If that technique is the new lowest cost method, they'll switch over probably as quickly as they can to using the new technique. And then the next one is changes in resource prices. So this again goes back to finding the lowest cost technique. If labor was $3 and it decreases to $1, then the firm will probably switch to a technique that uses less labor. And you'll actually do some problems using this idea of a change in resource price to see what happens when the firm is choosing the least costly method and then what will happen to their profits. The last question is, how will the system promote progress? And this is something we've already talked about earlier. The system continues to improve through technological advances because entrepreneurs, business owners are always trying to find new methods of production or new goods that never existed before to try to increase their profits. So we're going to see a lot of technological advances and also capital accumulation. When firms have profit, a lot of times they will purchase more capital goods, and that will allow them to become even more profitable in the future. One specific example of technological advance that we see a lot in the market system is called creative destruction. And what this means is that there's new products or new production methods, new techniques to making the product that make the old products or the old techniques obsolete. So it destroys the markets for the old products or techniques. So you should think of creative destruction as a good thing. So an example of creative destruction is how DVD players replaced VHS. So there was a brand new product that never existed before, and when it came out, it destroyed the market for VHS players. And the same thing is happening with streaming services now, with Netflix. So now there's this brand new product that never existed before that is now making DVDs obsolete. So that's creative destruction. We've finished up our 5 questions. We have 3 more concepts to go over that will really help wrap up the idea of the market system. The first is the invisible hand. Now this is one of the most challenging concepts in this chapter. So the definition of it is given here. The invisible hand is the tendency of competition or the market system to cause individuals and individual firms to unintentionally but effectively promote the interests of society, even when each individual firm only attempts to pursue its own interests. So here's the idea. We have individuals and businesses that are promoting their own self-interest. So we talked about how individuals are trying to maximize their utility and businesses are trying to maximize their profit. What happens in the market system, in this competitive environment, even though we have all of these people focusing on their own self-interest, it ends up being in the best interest of society. For example, when firms focus on maximizing their profit, they're automatically going to make what people want to buy. The concept of the invisible hand was first introduced by Adam Smith, who's known as the father of economics. He wrote this book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, where he described the invisible hand, how this actually works. He said, it seems like there's an invisible hand over this competitive market system that's making everything work very smoothly and very well for the economy as a whole. So we just talked about how the market system can work very well for an entire economy. Now let's look at the flip side, the exact opposite, which is a command system. And the command system does not work. So we have seen the command system cause economic ruin in countries like the Soviet Union, which ended up collapsing in Eastern Europe. The same thing happened there to their economies. And it was also happening in China. Now, China still has a communist political system, but they have moved to a market system for their economy. And when they moved from the command system to the market system, they saw amazing levels of economic growth. So what is it about the command system, about communism or socialism, that does not work? Number one is the coordination problem. So remember, we have the central planning board that's making all of the economic decisions. And what they've done is they've taken multitudes of economic decisions and left it to be decided by a small group of people. The larger the country was, the worse that it became, because it's impossible for a group of people to make all the decisions correctly for an economy. And if one decision was wrong, it would ripple throughout many different places that were connected to it in the economy. So there's no way for a group of individuals to correctly coordinate all of the economics that need to happen in a country. The second reason the command system didn't work is the incentive problem. So because the government owns all of the resources, there's not a way for anyone to make a profit off of investments because they're not allowed to purchase anything, or their work. So when the government owns the business, then the entrepreneur doesn't get to keep the profit from the business because all the profits would go to the government. Then what happens is the entrepreneur doesn't have any reason to try to reduce costs, so the business becomes inefficient. They also have no reason to purchase more capital or to invent new products or methods of production. So a great example of the differences between the effectiveness of the market system and the command system is Korea. So in 1945, Korea split into North Korea and South Korea. South Korea switched to a market system, and North Korea is using communism. And what we see now, after these 50-60 years, is that South Korea has one of the highest income per person in the world. They're actually number 28 on the list. And North Korea has one of the lowest income per person. They're at 178th out of 192 countries. The last thing we're going to do in this chapter is look at the circular flow model. This is a very basic diagram of the economy. So we're actually in what we call a private and closed economy. Private means there's no government. So private always means no government. You may also see public. Public means government. Okay? So this is private, no government. Closed means no international trade. So in our private closed economy, where we don't have any international trade, we don't have any government, the only two people interacting are the households, that's the individual, you, and the businesses. So what we're going to see is how money flows through the economy, also how products, that's goods and services that are produced, and resources, remember that's our land, labor, and capital, and entrepreneurs, so how these flow through the economy. So here's a picture of the circular flow diagram. We have two groups of people, one, the households, and two, the businesses. Now, think about how households and businesses interact with each other. Well, first thing is that households purchase products from businesses. That's what's happening down here in the product market. So the businesses make the goods and services, they bring the goods and services to the product market, and they sell the goods and services to the households. So the households receive the products in the product market. In exchange for the goods and services, the households will pay for the goods and services. So on this side, the blue one around the outside, that's actually the money. So the money is moving from the households to the product market. For consumers, we normally call this spending or expenditures. You can see that down here. We're going to use the word expenditures a lot in this course. So expenditures just means spending. So the households are spending their money and they're giving it to the businesses, and the businesses call this amount revenue. And we've already talked about that. So revenue is the amount of money that the businesses receive from selling their products. So that's what's happening down here in the product market. Now, in the other way that households and businesses interact is in the resource market. So we talked about our resources, our land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. These are owned privately. So they're owned by the households. The households will sell the resources to the businesses to use. So think about labor for a second. You own your ability to work. You can sell your work to the businesses, and in return, the businesses will pay you. So for the businesses, this is the cost. This is the amount that they're spending on their resources. So that money is going to flow through the resource market from the businesses to the households. And to us individuals, we consider that our income. So they actually, you might want to write income down here. They actually put that down as specific types of income. In general, all of these are called income. Depending on the resource that you sell, that looks differently. So for workers, we receive wages. If we're selling our land, then we would receive rent. If we're selling capital, we receive interest. This actually happens through the banking system, which isn't pictured in the circular flow diagram, but we receive interest on our financial investments. That correlates to capital. And then the entrepreneurs receive profit. So this is a good basic diagram of how the market system works.